Great. I think that's it from me by way of introduction. So looking forward to the discussion. Thanks so much for joining us. And now I hand over to Andrew Laird, who's the Managing Director of Mutual Ventures, who's going to talk us through the Levelling Up Fund. Andrew.
Thank you very much, Derek. And it's a real pleasure to be here meeting with you all today. Apologies if you can hear some noise outside. There is some leveling up going on right outside my window here, which has just started, which is a little bit annoying. But I wonder if we could bring up my slides, please, and then we can make a start. So as Derek said, I'm Andrew Laird. I'm the Managing Director of Mutual Ventures, and our particular interest in the Levelling Up Fund is that we are specialists in helping develop business cases and applications for central government funding. So I'm going to start by just sharing a little bit about what we know about the Levelling Up Fund so far. So next slide, please. So this is from the UK government's perspective, this is what they are talking about in terms of a domestic agenda. And a big flagship of that is the Levelling Up Fund itself. It's a fund that is jointly managed across a number of departments in Whitehall. So the Treasury, which obviously holds the purse strings, the Department of Transport, because quite a big emphasis is on transport, and the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. I think, as everybody will know, the structure the government has put around this connects central government in Whitehall directly with councils, and as far as Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have gone, has in a sense bypassed the devolved administrations, which I completely understand is quite a controversial move, but it is how the fund is structured, and it's how, at least for this round, we will have to engage with it. The total value of the fund over its lifetime is 4.8 billion, which I suppose when we look at the numbers involved in the COVID response doesn't seem a lot, but actually when you look at it and apply to what uses it could be put to, it is a substantial amount. That funding needs to be spent by the time of the next election, so 2024 is the estimate, including 600 million to be spent this current year. And the whole purpose of the fund is that it is designed to support cities and towns, communities with physical and social infrastructure projects. So not just roads, rail stations, but also community infrastructure like libraries, community hubs, that type of thing. So it is a very broadly designed fund. Alongside the budget this year, the full prospectus for the fund was released, which provided us with quite a lot of detail. And then subsequently to that, we've had more detail within a technical note and the application form itself. Next slide, please. So in terms of what you're able to bid for, it's interesting in the way it's structured, in that I haven't seen a fund structured in this way before, but the number of bids that can be submitted is to do with MP numbers. So if you have a local authority, for instance, that has 2 MPs whose constituencies fall entirely within your boundary, you will be able to submit two bids, and they could both be up to 20 million in value. If you have a smaller authority where you've just 1 MP, then that's just 1 bid that you can submit. Sorry, I should say 1 successful bid that you can submit. If you're in the situation where an MP's constituency crosses across local authority boundaries, then there will need to be a decision as to which local authority will submit the bid that particular MP supports. It's also possible for bids for larger transport schemes to be submitted, and they can be up to 50 million. So if it's transport, it can be higher. If it's other elements like urban renewal or regeneration, then the limit is still 20 million. For say the government has also categorized councils and local authority areas in terms of their need for regeneration and for levelling up. And they split it into 3 groups, category 1, 2 and 3. The latest guidance shows that there are 93 councils in England which are category 1 and all of the councils in Wales and Scotland are category 1 as well. Now, the importance of that is that each of those councils will get 125,000 capacity funding support to use to support them and help them either internally or by bringing in support to develop their bid. And the key thing, which I'll talk a little bit more about, is there is an initial deadline for round 1 bids, which is the 18th of June. That 125,000 capacity funding, according to the Levelling Up prospectus, is aimed at supporting councils who are spending a bit longer developing a bid and are aiming for round 2 onwards. So you can also put forward package bids. So it may well be that when you're thinking of levelling up, it's not just a single project. It could be a group of projects all based around the same geographical area. There's an important element to that if there are different projects within a bid, they have to have an overarching strategic link. So for instance, it could be that you're doing a town centre regeneration of a market square, and you also want to improve transport links to enable people to actually get to it, or improve parking or something like that. So the packages have to be related, and you can have up to 3 separate projects within a bid. But also bear in mind that a project has a lot of different line items under it. So, you know, if you're talking very small expenditure items, then usually you can just package those up into the same project. Now, very critically, and again, rather unusually for this type of fund, MP support is critical. It's not quite mandatory, but it is very, very important. So each MP can prioritize one bid. So they can support other bids, but each MP can only prioritize one bid. And the very first question in the application form is, do you have the support of an MP for this bid? So engaging with your local MP is really important. We're still waiting on some further information. So we had the prospectus at the time of, we had the prospectus at the time of the budget. Then we now are expecting FAQs this month, and then further guidance in the spring, inverted commas. My guess is that further guidance coming in the spring, or late spring as it will be now, will be about the timings of rounds 2 and possibly 3 onwards. Next slide, please. So the structure of the application form itself is split into 3 elements. So there's strategic fit, value for money, and deliverability. So on the strategic fit side, it's very clearly about MP endorsement, which I've talked about already. Stakeholder engagement and support, you must be able to demonstrate that you have engaged with the groups who will benefit from this investment, and you can show that they really want it. So we're thinking communities, civil society, private sector. Then the case for investment is very important as well. So what you have to do in the application form is demonstrate and evidence that there is a clear challenge. Then you must show why the investment is needed from government. So is there some sort of market failure that the natural flow of things isn't able to solve? So really good example of that is something like if you have a market center or a town center that is particularly run down, investment isn't coming in because there isn't an anchor institution like a cinema or a couple of restaurants or something. So it's about that investment which unlocks other investment. Then the last bit in strategic fit is around clear alignment with the local and national context. So each of your councils will have local plans and economic strategies, and possibly even transport plans. You've got to demonstrate that what you're proposing here clearly aligns with that. And then additionally, and this is something which is, again, relatively new, is the fact that it must align with a national government's strategic priorities. So a good example would be net zero. Next slide, please. So value for money. So this is, we must remember, these applications will be assessed by Treasury officials who love to see value for money very clearly set out. The key metric here is the benefit cost ratio. So all of the questions lead to that. So a benefit cost ratio is essentially, as I'm sure many of you will know, what benefit monetarily an investment will bring divided by what it costs. And generally speaking, a poor benefit cost ratio is anything less than 1 for obvious reasons. An acceptable one is anything between 1 and 2. And a really good or high benefit cost ratio is anything over 2. So that's essentially getting £2 of value back for every pound government invests. This section is quite complex and it asks for quite a lot of information. So it first of all wants to know that you've sourced the information appropriately and you can evidence that it's real and that it's recent. Then it wants you to be very clear about what benefit this proposition will bring. And remember, in the strategic case or in the strategic fit, it was asking about specifically about what challenges that this will address. Then this bit around what are the benefits that it will bring need to clearly link to that. Then there's the economic costs of the proposal. So where's the investment coming from, and exactly over what number of years, and with depreciation, etc. will that be? Then the value for money proposal itself then is the analysis of that benefit cost ratio. So this section is really important. This is the kind of crunchy numbers bit where you have to really evidence what benefit this will bring and why the Treasury and the government should invest in this project as opposed to other projects, which it will be in competition with, which is the way that this fund is set up. There's also an element of space here to talk about non-monetizable benefits. So if there are wider benefits that this investment will bring that it's not that easy to put a monetary value on, then there is space to explain that, and you will get credit for that. Next slide, please. So this is deliverability. So this is all about convincing the assessors that you can get this done, both on time, on budget, and with the right partners in place. So the financial question is exactly as it says in the tin. It will ask you to clearly identify how much this will cost, what the money will be spent on, where it's coming from, is there any third sector investment, private sector investment, contribution from the council, from other sources. The commercial element is around, do you need partners in this, either public sector or private sector, so construction partners, for instance? Do you have those arrangements in place? Do you have heads of terms in place for those? Or if you don't, it'll ask you to describe what procurement process you will go through to put those in place. The management element is about the project plan. So if, for instance, you were going for the June deadline for round one, it would need to show that you will start spending the funding within this financial year. But regardless, you need to show that the funding will be spent by 2024. So that milestone, essentially Gantt chart, will be really important. And then the final element is monitoring and evaluation. So you need to describe how you will monitor what's happening so that you can prove to government that you are achieving what you have said you will achieve. Next slide, please. And then finally, the decision-making process. So the decision-making process has only been released as far as round one is concerned, but we can expect it to follow something similar for future rounds. So number one, if you were going for the June deadline, which is fast approaching, then it's a pass-fail element. So the key question is, will expenditure begin this financial year? So will it begin by the 31st of April next year? And if it won't, then it won't get approved in round one. The second stage is assessment against the criteria that have been very clearly set out in the prospectus and the technical note. And the first one is characteristics of place. So that is to do with what category of area you are. So in Wales, it's predominantly category 1, but there are some 2s as well. Then it looks at those 3 elements of the application. So strategic fit, value for money, and deliverability, and it will score against each. And the idea then is that from that second stage of the assessment, the long listed bids are then shortlisted. Now, stage 3 is around the final decision making, and there is quite a lot of subjectivity, I would say, in this. The government reserve the right to make splits in terms of themes. So they may want to see a certain proportion of transport bids, a certain proportion of urban regen bids, etc. They'll be looking for a geographical spread as well. There's not a lot of detail in that as to whether they want a full geographical spread for each round or just over the lifetime of the fund. Prioritization, they may weight the 4 elements of part 2 there. So characteristics of place, strategic fit, value for money, deliverability, they may put different weightings on those. And then the final bit is just consideration of other investment that your area may or may not have had in the past. So that is everything that I was going to cover on my part of the presentation. I would be really delighted to engage with any questions that you have or talk about it a bit more. But just as a final message, I think the councils in Wales do have the opportunity to bid for any of the rounds, and if you didn't want to go for round 1, that would open up the possibility of getting that 125,000 capacity support to allow you to spend a bit more time bidding for round 2 onwards. So there is no rush to go for the first round. Thank you. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. That's a great overview of the Levelling Up Fund. So straight over then to Sarah from Wales Co-op Centre, who's going to take us through the Community Renewal Fund. Sarah.
Right, thank you very much, Derek. Good morning, everybody. Borodar. Ben, I was just wondering, can you enable my screen share, please, or put up my slides, please? So I think in terms of what I wanted to run through was, the Community Renewal Fund. Most of you know about it already. Most of you have gone live with it. So I'm not sure that I'm telling you anything new. But I think what I'd be hoping to maybe is to provoke debate amongst us and maybe tell you some of the information we've been getting back from some of our organisations that we work with across the third sector. Sorry, Ben, are you able to put the slides up, please? So, first of all, if we do start thinking about the Community Renewal Fund, I think what we know from this is that it's going to be the precursor for the longer term Shared Prosperity Fund. And I think that's probably why, all of us want to get a little bit know a little bit more about it, start to know why it's working, what's not possibly working with it. But I think that's of something that's of real interest really to all of you on the call today. So if we go to the next slide, please, Ben. So we know that there's, the 4 different areas that UK government have talked about in terms of the priorities. So we've got the investment in skills, the investment in local business, we've got the communities in place, and also the supporting people into employment. And, the projects that are coming through to you or are being, promoted by yourselves can either be aligned with one of those priorities or sit across several of those different areas. And I think what's also coming out in the guidance, but also, looking at your websites of how you're promoting the funds, is this, that you're looking at prioritising those bids against your local priorities. And I think that's what we need to make sure that, third sector organisations know about. Could we move on to the next slide, please, Ben? So we know that 14 of our local authorities in Wales are on that top 100 priority places that are eligible for the fund. However, those that are not on the list can still apply, but they really need to demonstrate that strategic fit. I think what's important is that UK government does anticipate that there will be a real variety in terms of the, the size of the projects, but also the themes of the projects that are coming through. But they have made it very clear, and I think, again, this is something that's really coming through on local authority websites, is that they really want to see these bigger projects that are maybe hitting more of those kind of cross-cutting kind of deliverables and impact. But I think this is really causing confusion, especially to the third sector. What we're really getting a number of phone calls and email inquiries about is that, gosh, we can't get together a £500,000 project so quickly. So I think that that's maybe one of the messages that's causing slight confusion. Can we move to the next? Thank you. So we know that this fund is predominantly a revenue fund. So we've got 90% of that funding at least, or fully revenue based. We know as well that it runs from 21 to 22, and that government has made it clear that the projects need to be scaled in that way. There's also been discussion around match funding, and I don't know what you think. I think be interesting to pull out your thoughts, but how realistic is that given the deadlines that we're actually talking about? So on the next slide, moving on to look at maybe the role of the local authority. You're all using the standard bidding form. We know the guidance there from UK government. But I think what we'd really wanted to pull out on this was around, the role within the guidance that is on the UK government website is around this constructive engagement with local partners, including public, private and third sector organisations. So, the bids will then obviously go to UK government, but it's a maximum of 3 million bids per place. So on to the next slide, please, Ben. Thank you. So I think what I actually wanted to ask you here was around, collaboration with other local authorities. I just wondered, was this something you were thinking about within Wales? Are we looking at any bids that might sit across some of our regions or around some of our growth deal areas? Because I think in some of those growth deal areas, we know that some are on the 100 list and some aren't. So just be interested if any of you had entered into debate with some of your neighbouring local authorities about whether to submit regional deals or regional bids. Next slide, please, Ben. So, there are a range of applicants that can apply for this. So obviously, coming from Wales Cooperative Centre, we're very much thinking about voluntary and community sector organisations. But, there's also a role for organisations such as universities, key anchor organisations really within your local areas, but also yourselves can submit bids. And I guess we, put that back to you. Is that something that you're really thinking of? Who might you be partnering with? That follows on really to the idea of this consortia bids. Everybody must be eligible for it, but one of the partners has got to take the lead in terms of pulling the bid together and submitting it. So again, be really interested to see what you're thinking in terms of those consortia bids. Next slide, please. So, as Andrew said, really, for the first round of levelling up, we know time seems to be ticking by very quickly. And, thinking that the bids have got to go to UK government by the 18th of June. Now, I've put a set of question marks against all of these next dates. And, again, like to know what you're thinking about this. It's saying that the results might be out mid-July. The project's then ready to start July and August. Everything to be completed by the 31st of March 2022. Again, how realistic are some of those timeframes, particularly if we're looking at some of the bigger projects? What we had noticed, and colleagues at WCVA had pointed out, is that some local authorities are actually looking at closer end dates, such as January 22, so that everything can be submitted, the final evaluation done, with it by that 31st of March date. So again, when we're looking at maybe projects not realistically starting until August and then finishing by January, it's a relatively short time frame to get things done. Next slide, please. So, most of you will know, have gone live with the fund. But what we have really noticed is the dates to submit applications really vary. For some of you, you're looking at submitting in early May. For others, it is the end of May, so there's a little bit more time for consideration and some debate. Some of you have gone down the expression of interest route as well, and the deadline for some of those is Friday. So again, there is that confusion, I think, amongst the sector of everybody seems to have used quite different dates and approaches, which makes it difficult to kind of get bids together. So could I go to the next slide, please, Ben? So I think for some as well, there's just been information on websites, and you've kind of made it clear that because it is a competitive process, you don't really want to enter in debate with potential applicants. However, a few local authorities have been running webinars and surgeries. It'd be interesting to see, is that something that you're intending to carry on until the actual submission date, so people can get the most of your knowledge? I think what's actually come out in the past few days, whilst people have been looking at this funding arrangements even more, is that the funding, the payments are going to be in arrears. And again, I think that's going to be really difficult for a lot of particularly smaller third sector organisations to participate in this, particularly if they're looking for bigger funding pots. What we are doing with colleagues from the WCVA as well is, if you are getting inquiries from third sector organisations, is that we're going to be running a webinar on the 4th of May between 2 and 3 in the afternoon. And we can send you more details of that if you have organisations within your areas that you think might need that. So Ben, if you could move on to the next slide, please. Derek, if I can hand over to you for the last couple of slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a great overview, and hopefully that's been helpful for people. Yeah, I guess the last few slides are, we're just asking if there is a role for us to be able to help third sector organisations in your local areas to engage with the fund. So we'd be interested to hear whether that would be something that would be usefully done in your area, whether looking at project management capacity would support the delivery of some third sector organisation projects within the short timescale there is for delivery. Next slide, please, Ben. And, there is also, we've been approached to consider, developing bid ideas that can be delivered locally by community groups or perhaps by us as an organisation. I guess there is a sense that no one wants to create lots of effort here for bids and projects that are not going to go anywhere or don't have the support of the local authority. But is there a role for stimulating and presenting ideas to local authorities to support you to draw down the money and to deliver for local communities in your area? So it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts on all of that. And those are some of the priority areas listed in the prospectus and areas in which, for example, the Wales Co-op Centre works, but obviously there are others who can do similar. Thank you, Ben. If you could take down the presentation. That gives us almost exactly 30 minutes for questions and comments. So let me invite people to ask questions and comments, and in no particular order, I will look down the chat list. David Boyce, you've got a question. I think it was for Andrew during his presentation. David, do you want to come in?
Yes, it was just quickly to ask whether, looking at the cost-benefit ratio, whether social benefits can be included in that calculation, and precisely how one might go about doing that. Sorry if you actually cover that point in your presentation and I missed it, but it does seem to me that for a lot of particularly third sector organisations, we may be particularly looking at increasing or at working on social benefit through things like improvements in people's perceptions of well-being and improvements in health, which are always difficult to demonstrate precisely. Perceptions of well-being one can probably evidence fairly well through surveys, but tangible benefits in health are much more difficult to evidence. So just really a question of, as I say, as to whether social benefit might be included in that cost-benefit ratio analysis, and how one might go about doing it.
Thank you, David. Great question. So there's not, as you probably imagine, there's not a totally straightforward answer to this. So the guidance that we need to be looking at in terms of this is the MHCLG evaluation guidance, and that makes it very clear that if you can demonstrate that what you're doing has a health impact that will save cost to the NHS, for instance, then yes, you can absolutely include that as a monetizable benefit. More general things around well-being, which are more perception rather than cost. Now, I mean, I'm a huge believer in well-being. You know, don't get me wrong, but I've got my Treasury official hat on here, and there is room in it to talk about wider benefits which are harder to monetize. So you will definitely get credit for that, and I think it's really important. And I don't think the government has completely lost its focus on well-being. I think there are plenty of officials who take that very seriously. So if you can demonstrate that it creates a saving through improved health, which there are plenty of benchmarks around that, so I think that is to be taken seriously, then you can factor it into the benefit cost ratio number. But there is also space on the forum to talk about wider benefits which are harder to monetize.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Sorry, I missed a few questions. So Paula, you asked whether the PowerPoint presentations can be made available. We'll send an email around as a follow-up with the presentation, so definitely that can happen. Maggie Joan from the Third Ages, do you want to come in and ask your question?
Hello, I've put a couple of things in there, so I don't know which question you're referring to. I did want to know what what was it?
MHCLG.
That's it.
Sorry,
please make allowances for golden oldies who don't have a memory.
Sorry, it's the department whose name has changed more often than anything. I think it's currently the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government.
Right, yeah. Okay. I've been working for many years, since way before I got old, on setting up walkers and cyclist hostels, but with the aim of encouraging older people to keep fit. I describe it as the golden oldies version of the Youth Hostel Association. We won't discriminate against the young, but if we decide to go the charitable side, or the social side of it would be aimed at encouraging older people to keep fit and to feel less isolated. But we're also interested in cooperative housing, putting the two together. So basically we have premises in the centre of Llanfechn that are getting more and more derelict. When I purchased them 20 years ago with this in mind, there was Objective 1 funding available, but it took 4 years to get the planning, and by the time we got the planning it was 2004, which is when the Eastern Europeans came in and the Objective 1 funding disappeared. So these buildings are quite important for the village. They're right in the centre of the village opposite the town hall. And we are looking for a way of bringing them back into use. So my question was, would something like a small walkers and cyclists hostel with wanting to support cooperative housing?
Thank you, Maggie. I think that's one for Andrew. Thank you, Maggie.
Yeah, so I can be very brief on this. Yes, I think that would be a perfect example of both social and physical infrastructure. Probably to be a bid, it doesn't sound like it would be the quantum of what the Treasury would be expecting to receive in terms of bids on its own, but alongside other elements that would be refreshing, regenerating the town centre, I think it could be a really interesting and exciting element of it. And there is an emphasis in here about achieving government goals of trying to find the exact wording here, but about cycling is specifically mentioned there. So anything in there that would encourage that, I think that they'd find really interesting. And
I'm also working on something that I'm terming Bus Pass Explorers, as a way of encouraging golden olders to have everyday adventures instead of just going to the local shops, to travel a little bit further. Their bus passes. So would something like that be considered travel? I
mean, it depends what the investment is. What would the funding?
No, it's just ancillary.
Okay, yeah.
It wouldn't cost an awful lot. It's just something I'm already working on.
Yeah. I mean, it could be I'd happy to talk further with you about it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. I could read this out, but it's better if the people asking the question ask the question. So PA003699, could you ask your question, please?
Yeah. It's just whether obviously our health board works within the voluntary sector as well as health boards are able to spike. So all I hear is about local councils and local authorities. And also a bit of a dull question, where can we find all this guidance? What website is that available on?
I think that's for you, Andrew, and maybe
Is
Sarah.
that with regards to the Levelling Up Fund? Yeah,
I think for both really, the Levelling Up Fund and
so just,
the community one.
Great. On the Levelling Up Fund, it is only councils who can make applications unless the Transport Authority is a combined authority or something. So health boards wouldn't be able to apply on their own. They could certainly support bids. And in terms of where all the information is available, I don't know the exact government website, but if you were to Google Levelling Up prospectus, that would take you to the government site, which has all of the documentation on it. Sorry, we can probably I can send around the link when we send around the slides.
Thank you very much.
It's easily found on Google. If you Google Community Renewal Fund or Levelling Up Fund, you'll find the prospectuses there on the government websites.
Thank you.
I think, Sarah, with regard to that question, would a health board be able to put forward a revenue project that could then be adopted by the local authority and backed by the MP?
Yeah, that's interesting actually, Derek, because it doesn't actually mention local health boards. However, I would have thought that they were one of the institutions. I don't know. I know my colleague Janine from WCVA is on the call. I don't know if this is something that you've come across, Janine, if you wanted to come in. We've also all the links are just being put there in the chat to the documentation so that you can access that and have a look at what it's saying. But I don't see any reason. So maybe if, you know, local authority colleagues, if you're out there, if you'd like to add something into the chat or, you know, would like to say something to add to the debate, that would be really useful, because I think a lot of the questions at the moment seem to be coming from non-local authority colleagues. Right, Janine, would you like to come in?
I think Janine shaking her head.
It's not something that I've seen isn't possible. I've not seen specific reference that it is possible, but I've not seen specific reference that it isn't possible. So I haven't got a definitive answer either way on that.
Okay, well, if someone knows, perhaps they can pop that in the chat, or we can find out the answer and let people know afterwards. We've got the next question from KF. Kay.
Hi. Good morning to you. Quick question from ourselves here. I'm a local authority representative from Powys in Mid Wales. Situation we've got is that one of our MPs, we've got two MPs in our county, one of our MPs in the north of the county is really keen and supportive of a particular bid, a project. It's a big ongoing project, and they believe, the MP believes it should absolutely be a contender for the Levelling Up Fund, without a shadow of a doubt. We work in partnership with the organisation that's involved in this long-term restoration projects. We're on various partnerships with them, etc. But there seems to be an element of debate that we're having internally as to what position we're in. If we've got the MP saying that this absolutely needs to go forward, we don't own the project, we've got no rights over it at all, it's not our property in any way, shape or form, but the MP is really keen and supportive, and ultimately, you know, you just mentioned just now, you know, local authorities have to put the bids in. Is it then down to us to find a way around that in terms of the MP pressure that this should go forward, but it's not our bid? So creating some sort of partnership or agreement, because our local authorities is a little bit concerned about risk and accountability.
This is a really unusual part of this fund, isn't it, Andrew? Can you answer that?
Yes, that's a really good question. So I think the simple answer is that for the funding to be approved, there has to be some sort of market failure or some need for the council to spend in order to support that other organisation. So if, you know, it wouldn't be possible just to, I mean, so the council can just procure that support out to that organisation, but the funding has to flow through the council. But
Yeah.
there has to be a case that there's a problem that this funding has to solve, and therefore the council is the body that procures the solution to that problem. So it could well be that the council procures or contracts the organisation that you're referring to there, who owns, inverted commas, the project, and in a sense almost passports that funding to that organisation. But this isn't just a kind of a contribution to a project which is already ongoing. There has to be a market failure that this is solving, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Again, happy to talk outside of this forum if you want.
Oh, thanks ever so much. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Andrew. Sonia, I saw you were taking part in the discussion, but you've also got a question. Can I bring you in, please, Sonia?
Yes, thank you, Derek. I'm local authority in Neath Talbot, but also third sector and cooperative, so a range of activities. But we started to put together a project which is effectively come from the community organisations, but is now going to be led by the local authority, working with learning provider partners across the coherent framework for youth and community work training within local communities and development within local communities to develop place. Putting that together within the time frame for the Renewal Fund, we made our first attempt and then said, this isn't going to work. We just can't do it we can't do a pilot within this period. But we're now looking at a feasibility project, but it won't be anywhere near 500k. And is there a view that that would count against projects going forward? Because there is a real possibility of leading into something really big and possibly regional within the Prosperity Fund going forward from that.
Thank you, Sonia. That's a really interesting question, because I think it's a massive job to spend 500k within a few months on revenue funding, isn't it? Sarah, do you have an answer to that? I know Lowry from the WLGA is here as well, and who may have an answer to that. But Sarah, first to you.
Yeah, I think I sort of said in the slides, although it seems to be very much made clear that they want these bigger projects, I think there's also got to be a degree of realism, hasn't there? It has said that they'll support various sizes and themes, and I don't think any of us know quite how UK government might react, but if your local authority puts it forward, I think that we just have to hope that those of different sizes and those which are realistic to pull off in that time frame are taken into account. So I don't think we know the answer, but I would just say, yeah, it sounds a sensible bid and sensible project. So go for it.
Janine's put a camera on. Did you have an answer to that, Janine?
Yeah, it was just to kind of highlight that although in the technical documents to support CRF, it doesn't state anything other than around this 500,000. Within the FAQs on the UK government website, there is something in there that specifically states that there is no minimum threshold for projects. So, there is nothing there that says you cannot go in with a project at less than 500,000. So I think, the devil's in the detail of that application, and for you to be able to demonstrate why that project should be supported and why that should form part of the overall submission for the LA in that area.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Janine. Lowry, I did mention you. I don't know if you want to add to anything. Don't worry if you don't need to. I don't want to land it on you. No. Okay. Next question, Barbara. I think it's about the Levelling Up Fund. Barbara.
Yes, thank you, Derek. Good to see you. I'm from Conway Council. I've got a two-part question, actually, one part for Andrew and one part for Derek or for Sarah. So the Levelling Up question is around Conway has one constituency completely within its boundary. That's not a problem, but the other constituency we share with our neighbouring authority. When we are submitting a joint bid, does each authority then have capacity to go up to the 20 million, or would the 20 million ceiling be for the bid in full, as it were, as opposed to a 40 million pound bid?
Understood. It's the latter. So you would get the totals added together. Yeah. So if you were going to do a joint bid, then you would get up to the total of both.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Thanks for that answer. And then in terms of the Community Renewal Fund, what hasn't been mentioned this morning is the evaluation. There is a minimum £10 million evaluation requirement for each project. I've had various conversations with Janine on this one. The guidance is so open to interpretation. We've read it in 3 different ways now. We're really not quite sure which way this evaluation is supposed to be. We're working on the basis that every project coming through needs an evaluation plan, which would cost at least £10,000. And any really large scale project has to be either 1 or 2% of that total cost, but with a minimum of 10. So I think it's useful to make people aware, because if they're putting their projects forward and haven't included the evaluation, it's not going to get scored.
Thank you, Barbara. That's very helpful. I think that's very helpful for people. You said 10 million first of all. I thought, wow, that's a big evaluation.
I'm awfully sorry. I've got millions in my head.
No, that's fine. Absolutely. That's really helpful to share. Janine, did you want to add to that, or Sarah?
Barbara's point on evaluation, that we attended another event yesterday at a UK level where this was discussed, and there was a bit of a sales pitch from an evaluator who was also bringing another perspective to it about pooling those resources of all of these little 10k pots and bringing them together to look at a more well, they were selling it as a more impactful evaluation across a region. So again, it's not clear whether that's possible within the guidance, but that kind of brings another option to the table as well.
You can see the value in that, can't you? It would be helpful for project applicants, and you could see a program impact rather than an individual project impact. So thank you for that.
Derek, I was just going to add, as we've got other local authorities, on the call, it'd be interesting to see what they thought. I've obviously spoken to Janine about what Barbara's been saying, but it'd be interesting to see what their perspective is in terms of Conwy's interpretation. So maybe if people could maybe put things in the chat, I'm sure that Barbara and those applying for it would find that really useful.
Great, yeah, please do that, or let me know you want to come in. We've got plenty of things to get through actually. Charlotte's iPad, you've got a question.
Hi, do you know what, Derek? I've actually forgotten what the question is I put in there, because I've had so many since listening to everyone. But obviously, I've been, since obviously elected as a councillor now, I've been actually working on developing, as you know, my history, and obviously around the community hub, which obviously it just shows, obviously, I was a visionary way back in 2007, and I've developed it since. And obviously as a councillor, it gives me a different role now, which is key. But I think the problem has gone where it's the usual suspect organisations all the time going, chasing the grants. We haven't invested in a proper digital feasibility system, which obviously then gets the needs and wants of the communities, needs and wants of government, which I've always called social architecture. So again, what we're doing is the money sometimes doesn't actually go to the right places. And what I'm finding at the moment during COVID, a lot of the organisations didn't step up and come out in the community, but they did all the recovery grants, COVID grants. The duplication out there is like, well, astronomical.
Charlotte, can I encourage you to get to your question?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, where is the joined up approach, which I basically encourage the council leading on it, but where is the collaboration to prevent duplication of all government monies?
Well, that's a big question beyond this funding, I think, Charlotte, but it's a good point that you make. I think, I guess with the local authorities holding the ring on projects for the CRF in particular, they would hopefully be able to make sure projects are aligned to their plans, and there wasn't any duplication. But I see your point. This is quite a unusual funding arrangement, and it's new to all of us, and there is the quite a bit of confusion. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Let me move through to the next question. Gareth Davis, I think you have a question.
Good morning, and thank you for the presentation. Apologies for what might seem a overly technical question here, but it was just the in terms of the guidance for the for the fund. It takes you through this sort of the rabbit warren towards cost benefit analysis based around land value uplift, and without going into sort of the debate about the meaningfulness of that, but is that something which is mandated? Is that expected? Because obviously the levelling up could be pursuing other benefits, and I think there's been some debate around that, but that's been presented as being very much the HMLC, LCG, or whatever it's called this week, preferred approach. Is that something which would be expected, and would weaken or strengthen the bid if it was done that way or differently, please?
Yeah, great. I love that question. No need to apologise for the technicality of it. So land value uplift is a key element, but if you look at the MHCLG, which everybody knows what that is now, their guidance, you can include all sorts of things like quantifiable impact of air quality improvement, crime reduction, environmental improvement, public service transformation, energy use, greenhouse gas emissions. There's a very specific list of elements that you can include in that cost benefit analysis. So it doesn't just have to be land value uplift.
That's great. I think it's just the way it's presented. It was very much that is always the starting point, and everything else not saying is dressing.
Yeah,
but
well, it's the easiest thing that you can actually point out and say that is definitely going to happen. So yeah, fantastic. But they want lots of other stuff as well.
Thank you. That's great. Cheers.
Thank you. We've got time for a couple more questions. I'm going to come to you next, Dimitrios. And then after that, I wanted to come to, I think it's Louise Nicholson, to let us know how you're planning to involve the third sector in Powys, because it's interesting to understand, you know, how you want the third sector to respond and support councils. I know you don't want to create lots of extra work, but you do want ideas. So Dimitrios first of all, and then I think it was Louise.
Yeah, hi there. Dimitrios Plezas from Swansea University College of Engineering. We are interested on the CRF bit, not the capital one, from our team. I've got a few questions that I try to put into the chat separately as well, in bite size. So the first one is on consortia. So if we have a consortium-based bid that we might want to include subcontractors, or a consortium partner is outside the region but delivering for the project to the region, is that an eligible partnership?
Is that levelling up fund, Dimitrios?
This is the CRF, the revenue fund. It's not for capital.
I don't know the answer to that. Do you know, Sarah or Janine? I would imagine it would be possible if it was led by the local authority, but I'm not sure.
I think it would be possible.
Sarah.
Yeah, I think it would be possible, Dimitrios, but I think you have to think about how are these supported. I think the idea would be that the money's kept local. Why aren't you looking that your partners are, within Wales, within the regions that you're delivering? So I think that's something you'd have to make a strategic decision about.
Yeah, basically the reason is because it's a bit of a specialist project idea that we have in mind. It's based on digital marketplaces. Even though they do exist, and it's basically a continuation of an existing project for the Made Smarter program. And we already have a partnership that we've delivered a pilot, and we just wanted to spin it differently and extend it to a regional remit rather than at the national remit. I'm happy to speak to anybody about this a bit later on, but I'll move into the second question. What evidence is, if any, required for industry engagement to demonstrate the need, especially if a project has a demonstrable need, the need is demonstrated by strategic reports like the Made Smarter or the industrial digitalization strategy? Do we need to go around the same circle and trying to prove that Nippo Talbot manufacturers, for instance, need to adopt industrial digital technologies, if this is something that is already evidenced by many other reports?
Yeah, I think if you've got the evidence, I think that's where you need to enter into discussions with the local authority about what else you would need. You know, I think if it's there already and you can demonstrate that it fits against the strategic priorities of the fund, but also the strategic priorities of the different local authorities within the region. That's what you would need to do. Also, so a question you've got, Demetrios, about the MP support. You know, Andrew mentioned you need it for levelling up. Some local authorities have said yes, they would like to see that, but I don't think it's a requirement of the actual fund. I think it's something that some have set locally.
Not for the CR.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we are really happy to speak to the local MPs and would appreciate if yourselves would be able to link us up, possibly.
Really happy to help, Demetrios. If you perhaps get in contact after the meeting, we'll send out an email with contact details for Mutual Ventures and for ourselves. And
moving on to another question, match funding. Again, is evidence needed and permitted to be uploaded to your applications? For instance, a letter of support saying that a company is willing to pledge in kind, let's say, time of their employees to deliver an aspect of the project. Is that something that is permitted and able to upload in the application?
Is this CRF again, Demetrios?
Yes. Sorry, I'm talking only for CRF.
Janine, Sarah?
I might defer to Janine on that one. It does mention about match, you know, evidence of match funding, and obviously, you know, if you're going for grants or that would be difficult. But I think if you were going for a private sector funding, you know, that's easier to demonstrate, and I'm sure there is the option to maybe upload that kind of you know, support with the application. I don't know, Janine, if there's anything you'd like to add into that.
Specifically about additional evidence being required, but obviously the application form references maximising the impact of the investment through bringing match funding across all of the priorities apart from supported employment. So I would say if you have that evidence, then include it in your application to kind of strengthen that section.
Yeah.
Demetrios, Carol Clement Williams from Neathport Talbot Council is offering to speak to you after the meeting with to answer some of your questions. I'm going to have to move on, Demetrios, if that's okay, because I just want to squeeze one more question in. But please contact us and Carol and Mutual Ventures, and we'd be happy to help with the questions that you have. So I think it was Louise from Powys Council. Was it Louise Nicholson from Powys Council? I'm scrolling through these chat. Yes, it was. Louise, could you come in? It'd be interesting if you could put your point and let us know how you're engaging the third sector and what you would advise third sector organisations to do in your area.
Okay, so we've recently launched the CRF within Powys. So following the press release, as I put in the notes in the chat area, we've held an introductory event which was open to all stakeholders. And members from the Powys Association of Voluntary Organisations attended that event, and we have been working alongside them because obviously they are very much working within the communities and place investment priority area. And what they have been doing is they have then, since that event, they have been holding further meetings with people who'd be interested in getting bids together. So they've taken the onus off the local authority in a way, because the local authority will obviously be responsible for the appraisal of these applications as well. So it's difficult to know how much to get involved in the writing of these applications. So it's been really good that they have taken on that responsibility as a voluntary sector organisation. And we've also got other members, other organisations that are looking to put in bids together. So it's trying to just put people and network, put people in touch with each other, really. I don't know if you've got any questions other than that.
No, that's really great, Louise. And in terms of the size of those projects, what are you anticipating?
of course, we've had a lot of concern around the size of the projects, especially because of this encouragement around the larger $500,000 kind of scoping. And as you suggested earlier, the short timescales, it's going to be quite difficult to reach that amount of money, especially with revenue costs. So we have been encouraging applicants to either work together on a cooperative project or otherwise build together a package of applications with one joint objective. But of course, whichever way they do it, they're going to have to get together and talk through those applications with each other. I suppose that there's pros and cons with it really. With the sort of cooperative element, you've got one lead organisation, whereas with the others it would be independent applications going in, I would assume.
Thank you, Louise. That's really helpful. Right, we're going to have to end it there because we've gone over our hour. But Janine, can I ask you, do you want to make a plug for the webinar next week, which is aimed at the third sector before we end?
So we're running a webinar next Tuesday afternoon between 2 and 3. It's going to be focused on the Community Renewal Fund, and it's out there for third sector organisations to raise awareness and also just to bring together some of these questions and try and answer as many as we can. Obviously, signpost people to further support when we can. So we're running that jointly with Wales Cooperative Centre. We can send out the details of those webinar through, I presume, when the follow-up to this session happens. So please, if you're coming across any third sector organisations who do need support or further information, you can direct them to that. Obviously, their local CVC, Wales Cooperative and WCBA are all there to help as well.
Thank you, Janine. We will send out a link to people for that event after this one. I guess just wanted to end by saying I hope you found that useful. There are often more questions than there are answers, but gradually we're getting to those answers. As Janine has just said, I think Mutual Ventures, ourselves and the WCVA are really keen to support the successful delivery of these funding programmes in Wales so that they're aligned to Welsh priorities. I know the WLGA is doing a lot of work to support that too. So do get in contact if we can help in any way, and we'll send out contact details for that. So thank you very much for all of your contributions. Particular thank you to Sarah and Andrew for their presentations, and to Janine, who came in quite regularly to answer questions. I really appreciate that. So we will be in touch. Good luck with your application processes, and take care. Bye now.
Thank you.